The wind howled through the ruins of an abandoned colony on the desolate planet of Veridon 4. The once thriving outpost was now nothing more than crumbling buildings and rusted machinery, a graveyard of a forgotten war. Nathan Carter, a human scavenger, moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching against broken glass and debris. He had come here looking for valuable scrap, old tech that could fetch a good price in the trade markets. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, his senses alert for any danger. Pirates, rogue machines, or even wild alien creatures could be lurking in the shadows. Then he heard it, a faint rustling sound from one of the collapsed buildings. Nathan froze, his hand moving instinctively to his pistol. He slowly approached the structure, stepping over fallen beams and shattered panels. The sound came again. Something was hiding inside. With careful steps, he peered into the dim interior of the ruined building. His eyes widened. A figure crouched in the corner, barely visible in the darkness. It was a woman, but not human. Her violet eyes glowed faintly, and her skin shimmered with faint bioluminescent patterns, shifting colors as she breathed heavily. She was wounded, one arm wrapped around her ribs, her other hand gripping a small blade. Nathan took a step forward, and she reacted instantly, baring her teeth like a cornered animal. Hey. Nathan raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. I'm not here to hurt you. The alien woman narrowed her eyes, her breathing ragged. She was afraid. Nathan noticed a fresh wound on her side, dark liquid seeping through the fabric of her torn clothing. She had been running from something, or someone. You're injured, he said, keeping his voice calm. I have med supplies. Let me help. She didn't reply. Instead, she shifted slightly, pressing herself against the cold wall. Nathan sighed. He could walk away, leave her to her fate. This wasn't his problem. But something in her eyes stopped him. You don't have to trust me, he said, carefully setting down his backpack and pulling out a small medical kit. But I think you need help more than I do. The alien woman hesitated, her grip tightening on the knife. Then, after a long moment, she slowly lowered the blade. Nathan exhaled in relief. He moved closer, careful not to startle her, and began treating her wound. As he worked, he wondered who she was and why she was here, alone and wounded in a war-torn place like this. But most importantly, who was she running from? This was no ordinary encounter, and he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Nathan led the alien woman through the ruins, moving quickly but silently. The hunters were close, too close. He could hear their heavy boots crushing debris, their voices muffled but firm. She has to be here. Spread out, one of them ordered. Nathan's heart pounded. They were searching the area. If they were caught, it wouldn't end well for either of them. He glanced at the alien woman. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, fear clear on her face. But she was silent, following his lead without hesitation. Nathan knew these ruins better than most. He had spent months scavenging here, memorizing every broken hallway and collapsed building. He tugged her arm and led her through a narrow passage, barely wide enough for them to fit. The walls were cold and damp, but at least it was safe. For now, they crouched behind a fallen steel beam as the hunters passed close by. Nathan held his breath, gripping his rifle. One of the hunters stopped, too close. Nathan felt the alien woman's fingers tighten around his wrist. He could sense her tension. She was trying not to tremble. The hunter muttered something into his communicator, then moved on. Nathan let out a slow breath. That was too close. He leaned in and whispered, "We need to get farther from here. I have a small hideout. You can rest there." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. They continued moving, sticking to the shadows. Nathan led her through tunnels and broken alleyways, avoiding open spaces. The ruins were dangerous, but they were also the best place to hide. After what felt like hours, they reached a small underground storage bunker hidden beneath a collapsed bridge. Nathan unlocked the heavy metal door, pushed it open, and gestured for her to go inside. She stepped in cautiously, looking around. The space was small, just a cot, a table, and shelves filled with supplies. It wasn't much, but it was safe. Nathan locked the door behind them. We should be okay here for now. The alien woman finally relaxed a little. She exhaled, her shoulders loosening. Nathan sat down, rubbing his temples. He had just risked his life for a stranger. He wasn't even sure why. He looked at her again. You gonna tell me your name now? She hesitated, then finally whispered, Rissa. Nathan nodded. Rissa, huh? Well, Rissa, I think you owe me an explanation. She didn't speak right away, but in her glowing eyes, Nathan saw something strange. Not just fear. Something deeper. And for the first time, he wondered, what had he just gotten himself into? The hours passed in silence as Nathan and Rissa sat in the dimly lit bunker. The only sounds were the distant howling of the wind and the occasional creaks of the collapsing ruins above them. Nathan leaned against the wall, eyes closed, trying to relax after the tense escape. But his mind raced. He had done the right thing, right? Helping her was the human thing to do, wasn't it? Rissa had still said nothing, but Nathan could feel her eyes on him every now and then. She was sitting across the room, watching him. He had tried talking, but she remained guarded. She had shared her name, but nothing more. Just when Nathan thought the quiet might stretch on forever, the faint hum of energy pulsed through the walls of the bunker. Rissa's eyes glowed brighter. Nathan blinked. What's happening? He asked, suddenly on alert. She slowly stood, her face unreadable. Without a word, she moved to the far corner of the room and picked up the small artifact she had been carrying. The one she hadn't let him see up close. It was glowing faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the vibrations in the air. This is why they're chasing me. Rissa finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. She turned to face Nathan. Nathan stood up, curiosity piqued. What is it? What are they after? Rissa held the artifact in both hands, her fingers tracing over the strange symbols carved into its surface. This is not just a piece of tech, she said softly. It's a key, a map. It leads to something very important. Nathan's brow furrowed. Important? Important to who? Rissa's eyes flickered with something he couldn't place. A deep sadness, maybe fear. Important to me, to my people, to everyone. Nathan didn't understand. Her people. He had thought she was alone. But now, as she spoke, he realized there was so much more going on here than he could have imagined. He stepped closer. You're not the only one after it, are you? Rissa shook her head. No, there are others. Hunters. But worse than that, there are those who will destroy entire worlds to possess this power. Nathan felt the weight of her words settle over him. This was bigger than just a runaway alien. It was bigger than just a stolen artifact. If what she said was true, the stakes were far higher than a simple bounty chase. She looked at him, her gaze serious now. I can't keep running, Nathan. Not from them. Not from what's coming. Nathan took a deep breath, trying to process everything she had said. His mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. He couldn't just walk away now. He had already crossed a line. All right, Nathan said, his voice steady but unsure. So what do we do now? Rissa stood taller, her face set with determination. Now we take the fight to them. Nathan wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but he knew he had made a choice, and there was no turning back. The stone door before them was enormous, covered in glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Rissa's fingers trembled as she held the artifact up to the door. The air around them was thick with tension, the silence only broken by the soft hum of the artifact. Nathan stood behind her, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes darting back and forth, scanning the jungle behind them. The hunters were close, he could feel it. Their footsteps, though muffled by the dense trees, were unmistakable. They were almost here. Is it going to open? Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rissa didn't answer immediately. She was focused entirely on the door, her eyes narrowed in concentration. The artifact in her hands began to glow brighter, and the symbols on the door seemed to respond, shifting and rearranging themselves. Just a little longer, Rissa muttered under her breath, her voice tight with strain. Nathan glanced over his shoulder again. He could hear the faint sound of voices in the distance. They were getting closer. They had to hurry. "Come on," Nathan urged, stepping closer to her. "We don't have much time." Rissa nodded, but her brow furrowed with concentration. She adjusted her grip on the artifact, pressing it harder against the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Nathan felt his stomach twist with worry. What if they didn't make it? What if the door didn't open? But just as panic began to creep in, the symbols on the door shifted violently, and with a loud grinding sound, the door began to slide open. Finally, Rissa exclaimed, stepping back as the stone door slowly creaked open. The moment it was wide enough, she grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him inside. They both entered the dark passageway beyond, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud. The air inside was cool and still, and the walls of the passage were lined with intricate carvings, telling stories of a people long gone. Rissa moved quickly, her eyes scanning the path ahead. "This is it," she whispered. "We're inside the vault." Nathan felt a surge of relief. For a moment, they were safe, but only for a moment. The hunters were still outside, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had the artifact. They moved deeper into the vault, passing through narrow hallways and ancient chambers. The walls were lined with strange relics and artifacts, each more mysterious than the last. But there was no time to stop and admire them. They had a mission, and the stakes were higher than ever. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the heart of the vault. In the center of the room was an altar, surrounded by ancient symbols and strange energy. Rissa stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe. "This is it," she said, her voice full of reverence. "This is where it all began." Nathan couldn't take his eyes off her. She looked different now, not just the scared fugitive he had found in the ruins, but someone who had a purpose, someone who was about to unlock the secrets of her people. But there was no time for celebration. Nathan heard footsteps outside the vault, growing louder by the second. "We're running out of time," he said urgently. Rissa nodded, turning to the altar. "I know. I need to activate the core. It will unlock the power, but I have to do it alone." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. "You're not doing this without me." Rissa gave him a determined look. "You don't understand. This power can only be unleashed by me." Nathan reached for his rifle, his eyes still scanning the entrance. "Then hurry. I'll cover you." As Rissa stepped forward to the altar, the chamber trembled, and a low rumble filled the air. They had reached the heart of the vault. But so had the hunters. The air in the bunker felt heavier now, thick with the weight of Rissa's words. Nathan watched her carefully, still trying to grasp the full extent of what she had just revealed. This artifact was more than just a trinket. It was the key to something enormous, something that could change the fate of worlds. Rissa was pacing now, her mind racing, her glowing eyes flicking back to the artifact every few moments. "I never wanted anyone to have this," she said, her voice filled with regret. "But now, it's too late. They know it's here. They'll stop at nothing to get it." Nathan took a step forward. "So, what is it? What's so special about it? And why did you keep it from me?" Rissa paused, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and apology. She gently set the artifact down on the table in front of them. The light from the device flickered in rhythm with her words. "This is the last hope of my people. We were once a proud and peaceful race. But we were betrayed. This artifact is the key to our survival." Nathan felt the weight of her words. "Betrayed by who?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "By the very beings we trusted most," Rissa replied, her voice darkening. "The other races, they were jealous of our knowledge, our power. They saw us as a threat and tried to destroy us. This artifact was the only thing we could rely on to preserve our legacy, our future. Nathan's mind was spinning. A weapon, a secret, the last hope of an entire race. It all seemed too much. But looking at Risa, at the determination in her eyes, at the fear in her movements, he knew she was telling the truth. So, this thing is a map too. What? A weapon? Nathan asked. Risa shook her head slowly. Not a weapon. A power. A power beyond anything the galaxy has ever known. The kind of power that could either save us or destroy everything in its path. Nathan was silent for a long moment, taking it all in. If what Risa said was true, then they were up against something far bigger than bounty hunters or warlords. They were talking about an ancient power, a force of unimaginable destruction or salvation. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the outside. Nathan's heart jumped. They found us, Risa whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Nathan grabbed his rifle, his mind racing. He knew they had to act fast. They couldn't let the hunters take the artifact. Get ready, he said, his voice low but firm. We're not going down without a fight. Risa nodded, her fear replaced with a new fire. She grabbed a small weapon of her own from a nearby shelf. The two of them stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The sound of boots pounding on the ground grew louder. The hunters were closing in, but Nathan and Risa weren't running this time. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting something far more important. And in that moment, Nathan realized that he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for an entire race, an entire future. The door to the bunker rattled as the hunters tried to break it down. Nathan took a deep breath. The final stand was coming. The door of the bunker shook violently as the hunters outside slammed against it with brutal force. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle, his body tensing for what was to come. The room, once a place of cautious refuge, had now become a trap. Risa stood near the back of the room, her face grim as she checked the small weapon in her hands. She was ready, but Nathan could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. They weren't just being hunted anymore. They were the prey in a deadly game. They'll break through in minutes, she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of panic. Nathan nodded, his mind working quickly. He scanned the room. The bunker was small, with little cover besides a few old crates and a rusty metal shelf. There wasn't much they could use to defend themselves if the door came down. We'll have to fight our way out, Nathan said. His voice was calm, though he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Risa looked at him, her glowing eyes sharp. You're sure? There's no other choice, Nathan replied. We can't stay here. We're outnumbered, but if we move fast and hit them hard, we have a chance. Risa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She moved to the side of the room, gathering a few small explosive devices she had hidden earlier. Nathan watched as she prepared them, her quick, precise movements reminding him of just how much he didn't know about her. But now wasn't the time to ask questions. As the pounding on the door grew louder, Nathan checked the ammo in his rifle, his thoughts racing. How many of them were out there? He couldn't be sure, but he'd heard at least 3 distinct voices. They had to make it out alive. He wouldn't leave Risa behind. The door creaked, a loud crack echoing through the bunker. The hunters were using a blasting charge to break it down. We're almost out of time, Risa said quietly. Nathan nodded, taking one last look at her. Stick close, stay low, and move fast. The door finally gave way with a deafening crash, the metal frame splintering as the hunters forced their way in. Nathan aimed his rifle, but he didn't fire yet. He waited. 3 figures stepped into the doorway, their dark armor glinting in the dim light. The lead hunter, a large, bulky alien, surveyed the room with a smug look on his face. Behind him, 2 others moved cautiously, weapons drawn. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't have time to think. He acted. Now, he shouted. Risa tossed one of the explosive devices toward the doorway, and as it exploded, Nathan fired. The blast sent the 2 hunters to the ground, shrapnel flying in every direction. The lead hunter ducked, narrowly missing the blast. Before Nathan could react, the remaining hunter lunged at him, swinging a blade in a deadly arc. Nathan rolled, barely avoiding the strike, and shot the hunter in the leg, forcing him to drop his weapon. "Stay down," Nathan ordered, as Risa stepped forward, her weapon raised. She fired a blast that hit the lead hunter square in the chest, sending him sprawling to the floor. For a moment, the room was filled with silence. The sound of their breathing was the only thing breaking the quiet. Nathan wiped sweat from his forehead and turned to Risa. "We've got to move. Now." Risa nodded, her face set with determination. "We're not done yet." Nathan looked out through the doorway, his pulse still racing. More were coming. They had to get out before the rest of the hunters arrived. With one last glance at the fallen bodies of the attackers, Nathan and Risa slipped out of the bunker, disappearing into the ruins once more. They were alive for now, but the real danger was only just beginning. The glowing energy of the vault faded slowly, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The hunters outside, once filled with determination, now stood frozen in place, their weapons lowered. They had come to take everything, but instead they had encountered something far beyond their understanding. Nathan lowered his rifle, his breathing shallow. His heart was still racing, and his mind was buzzing with the chaos of the fight. But now, it was over. The vault was secure. The core was activated. Risa had done it. He turned to her, still processing everything that had happened. "Is it really over?" Risa stood near the altar, her hands trembling as the energy from the core slowly dissipated. She looked exhausted, her once glowing eyes now dim, as if the power had drained her. But there was a soft smile on her face, one full of relief. "It's over," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "The power is sealed. The hunters can't reach it now. It's safe." Nathan's shoulders slumped with the weight of what they had accomplished. For a moment, they just stood there, in the center of the vault, surrounded by the ancient symbols that had once held such dark significance. The vault, which had been a place of hidden danger, was now a place of peace, for now. Risa slowly turned to face him. You risked everything for me. For this." Nathan frowned, still processing her words. "I didn't do it for you alone." Risa took a step closer. "But you did. You didn't hesitate. You didn't think about what it might cost you. You trusted me." Nathan met her gaze, his voice softening. "You needed help. And besides, I don't think you could have done it alone." He smiled faintly, trying to hide the exhaustion that weighed on him. She laughed softly, the sound a mixture of relief and wonder. "Maybe not." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the past few hours sink in. Then Risa stepped forward and placed the artifact into Nathan's hands. The soft glow of the crystal reflected in his eyes, and he instinctively tightened his grip around it. "This belongs to you now," she said, her voice serious. "It's yours, Nathan." Nathan looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean? I don't know how to." Risa interrupted, shaking her head. "You've been part of this from the beginning. You gave me a choice when no one else would. You trusted me. You fought for me. The core, the artifact. It's not just my people's legacy anymore. It's part of yours now, too." Nathan looked at the artifact, feeling its weight, its significance. She was right. He had been part of something much bigger than himself. And now, it seemed, the responsibility was his. He held the artifact up, feeling the faint warmth that emanated from it. The faint hum of energy still echoed through the vault, a reminder of everything they had accomplished. "This is your gift to me?" Nathan asked quietly, still trying to understand. Risa nodded. "It's not just a gift, Nathan. It's a promise. A promise that no matter where you come from, no matter what you've done, you have a place here. You have a purpose." Nathan looked down at the artifact, then back at her. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He wasn't the same man who had first stumbled into the ruins. He had made a choice, and that choice had led him here. To a power beyond anything he had ever imagined. To a woman who had shown him a truth he never expected. And whatever came next, Nathan was ready. "Thank you, Risa," he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Risa smiled, her eyes bright once again. "We're in this together now, Nathan. And that's all that matters." The vault, once a place of danger, had become a place of hope. A place where their journey was just beginning. The ground beneath Nathan's feet rumbled as Risa stepped closer to the altar in the center of the chamber. The ancient symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in time with her movements, their light growing brighter. A strange energy filled the air, and Nathan could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was no ordinary vault. It was something more, a place of immense power. Risa's hands trembled as she reached out to touch the glowing core on the altar. It was a sphere of energy, suspended above the stone surface, its glow shifting in colors Nathan couldn't describe. As her fingers made contact, the chamber shook again, more violently this time. The air hummed with a low, almost musical vibration, as though the vault itself was coming to life. "We're too late," Nathan muttered under his breath, hearing the sound of boots outside the chamber. The hunters had found them. He turned to Risa, his voice urgent. "We need to go. Now." But Risa didn't budge. Her eyes were locked on the core, her entire focus on the energy flowing through her. "I can't stop now," she whispered, her voice strained. "The core is the key to everything. It's the only way to stop the hunters." Nathan's stomach twisted with fear. They were in the heart of enemy territory now. If the hunters got inside this chamber, the artifact, and everything it held, would be lost. But Risa's words stuck in his mind. "It's the only way to stop them." The sound of the hunters' voices grew louder. They were at the entrance, closing in fast. Nathan took a deep breath. They were trapped, with no time to waste. "We don't have a choice," he said, his voice steady despite the panic building inside him. "I'll make sure you're safe. Activate the core. I'll hold them off." Risa's eyes snapped to him, shock written all over her face. "You're crazy." "I'm not letting you die for this," Nathan said, determination hardening his voice. "Activate it. Now." Risa hesitated for a brief moment, her face a mix of doubt and resolve. Then, without another word, she turned back to the core and placed her hands on it. Nathan could hear the hunters just outside the chamber. They were seconds away. The energy in the room surged as the core responded to Risa's touch. The air seemed to bend, and the walls flickered with brilliant light. Nathan raised his rifle, aiming it at the entrance, his heart pounding. He wasn't a soldier, but in that moment, he had to be. The first hunter appeared in the doorway, a large alien with dark armor and a weapon raised. Nathan fired, the bullet striking the hunter in the shoulder. The alien staggered back, but didn't go down. Nathan fired again, and this time, the hunter collapsed. "Get inside," Nathan shouted to Risa, his voice rough with the effort of holding off the attackers. Risa didn't move at first. She was still focused on the core, her hands glowing with the energy that now surrounded her. The chamber began to hum louder, the power radiating from the core growing stronger. Nathan shot at another hunter, forcing him back, but more were coming. He could hear the rush of footsteps behind him. Risa finally moved, stepping back from the core and retreating toward Nathan. "It's done," she said breathlessly. "The core is activated." The room trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just the force of the energy. It was the power of the vault unlocking. The walls glowed brighter than ever before, and the hunters in the entrance froze, their eyes wide with fear. But Nathan wasn't finished. He wasn't about to let them win. He stepped forward, blocking the doorway with his rifle aimed high. "Stay back," he shouted. Risa's voice was quiet, but the relief was clear. "It's over, Nathan." The energy in the vault surged as if to confirm her words. The hunters were too late. The power of the core was now in their hands. Nathan looked at Risa, feeling the weight of the moment. They had won, but it had cost them everything. Nathan worked carefully, cleaning the alien woman's wound. She flinched but didn't make a sound. The deep gash on her side looked painful, but it wasn't life-threatening. He wrapped a bandage around her ribs, securing it tightly. "You should be fine for now," he said, stepping back. The alien woman watched him with cautious eyes, still holding her small knife in her trembling fingers. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Nathan sat down across from her, giving her space. He knew she wouldn't speak unless she felt safe. "You have a name?" he asked after a long silence. She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the broken entrance, as if expecting someone to burst in. Nathan sighed. "You don't talk much, huh?" He picked up his canteen and took a sip before offering it to her. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Nathan watched as she drank, her throat moving with each swallow. She was exhausted. He had seen this look before, the look of someone who had been running for too long, with nowhere left to go. "Who's after you?" he asked, lowering his voice. The alien woman stiffened. Her glowing violet eyes flickered with fear before she turned her face away. She didn't want to answer. Nathan frowned. This was bad. He had a feeling she was in deep trouble. And now, by helping her, he might be in trouble too. A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. Footsteps. Nathan instantly grabbed his rifle, motioning for her to stay quiet. He moved toward the entrance and peeked outside. 3 figures in dark armor were moving through the ruins, scanning the area. Hunters. Nathan's grip on his weapon tightened. They were looking for her. He turned back to the alien woman. Her face had gone pale, and her fingers dug into the ground. She was terrified. Nathan exhaled sharply. He had 2 choices: hand her over and walk away, or help her escape. He looked at her again. This was a living, breathing person, not just a fugitive. She was scared, wounded, and alone. He had already made his decision. Nathan moved fast. He grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and held out his hand. "Come with me if you want to live," he whispered. The alien woman hesitated for just a second. Then, with a shaky breath, she placed her hand in his. Without another word, they slipped into the shadows, disappearing into the ruins. Nathan knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. Nathan and Risa moved swiftly through the dark, crumbling streets of the ruined colony. The sounds of the hunters' footsteps echoed faintly behind them, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Risa led the way, her body moving fluidly through the debris-strewn path, her eyes scanning their surroundings. Nathan followed closely, trying to stay as quiet as possible, but the weight of the artifact in his backpack reminded him that their troubles weren't over yet. They were far from safe. "What now?" Nathan asked in a low voice, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they weren't being followed. Risa didn't stop, her focus unshaken. "We need to get to the vault." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Vault? What vault?" "The place where this was hidden," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "The artifact is more than just a key. It's a map to a vault deep within the ruins. Inside, we'll find what's left of my people's power. It's the only thing that can stop them." Nathan didn't fully understand, but he didn't need to. He only needed to know one thing. They had to get there before the hunters did. They ran through the ruined streets, weaving in and out of the debris, the distant roar of engines growing louder. The hunters were closing in. "Keep moving," Nathan urged, pushing himself harder, trying to match Rice's pace. After several minutes of running, they reached the outskirts of the city. The ruins gave way to dense jungle, thick with vines and towering trees. Nathan could feel the temperature rising as they ventured deeper, the shadows of the trees offering only limited cover. "The vault is nearby," Risa said, her voice strained. She stopped briefly, pulling the artifact out of her pack. It glowed brightly, casting an eerie light on the surrounding trees. "This way." Nathan nodded, staying close as they moved deeper into the jungle. The path was narrow, overgrown, and difficult to navigate, but Rissa seemed to know where she was going. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a massive stone structure hidden in the dense foliage. It was partially covered in vines, but Nathan could see the outlines of intricate carvings and symbols on the walls, symbols he hadn't seen before. Rissa stepped forward, a mix of determination and fear in her eyes. She reached out, placing her hand on the wall. The stone was warm, and as soon as her fingers made contact, the ground beneath them trembled. The jungle around them seemed to go silent, and the trees swayed gently, as if the entire place was holding its breath. "What's happening?" Nathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rissa didn't answer. She stepped back as the wall began to shift, revealing the dark, narrow passage hidden within the stone. "This is it," she said, almost breathless. "We're here. The vault is inside." Nathan glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing. The hunters weren't far behind. They had to move fast. Without another word, Rissa stepped into the passage, and Nathan followed. The walls were smooth and cold, the only light coming from the faint glow of the artifact. The air inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. They moved deeper into the tunnel, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Nathan could feel the weight of the moment. They were so close, but so much was still unknown. Rissa stopped in front of a large stone door. It was covered in more symbols, the patterns swirling and shifting like they were alive. The artifact in her hands began to glow brighter. "This is it," she whispered. "We're about to unlock the truth." Nathan stood behind her, ready for whatever came next. The hunters were close. The danger was far from over. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now.